public participation in ecosystem services. This module introduces terms and examples related to ecosystem services. Various examples of participatory approaches to identify ecosystem services and stakeholders are highlighted and discussed. Within this module, you will become familiar with different ecosystem services and their relevance for different stakeholders. Become acquainted with the different participatory approaches in identifying and valuing ecosystem services for development planning. Explore the role of participatory approaches in identifying ecosystem services through use cases. Please familiarize yourself with the module structure. In this section, you will become familiar with different ecosystem services and their relevance for different stakeholders. Many of the solutions to our problems exist in nature. To better understand these solutions, we can explore the different benefits nature provides. These benefits can be referred to as ecosystem services or as nature's contributions to people or NCPs. Why are ecosystem services important? We rely on the environment for our well-being, through obvious benefits, such as fresh water and food, and not so obvious benefits, such as pollination and soil erosion regulation. These tangible and intangible ecosystem services have supported the growth and progress of the human population through the ages. While ecosystem services sustain development, development may impact ecosystem services positively and/or negatively. Unfortunately, in many cases, development has negatively impacted ecosystem services, leading to the worldwide decline of ecosystem services. One such example of a negative impact includes the decline of forested areas. Since 1990, the world has lost around 170 million hectares of forested area. Another clear example of development's negative impact on ecosystems is the case of the Atlantic cod collapse. The Atlantic cod stocks of the east coast of Newfoundland collapsed in 1992, resulting in the total closure of the fishery after hundreds of years of exploitation. Initially, the fishery was exploited through seasonal migratory fleets and small-scale fishermen. However, starting from the late 1950s, large-scale offshore bottom trawlers began exploiting the deeper part of the fish stocks. This led to a large catch increase, but after several decades of exploitation, the amount of fish declined significantly, due to habitat loss by bottom trawling. A question to consider is, how can the fishery collapse impact surrounding communities? The ecosystem services approach was developed to mitigate the negative impact of development on ecosystem services by utilizing the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. The assessment identifies 4 broad categories of ecosystem services. The 4 categories include provisioning services, regulating services, cultural services, and supporting services. In some cases, these categories may overlap. Provisioning services are products obtained from ecosystems, such as fresh water, food, fiber and fuel, biochemical, natural medicines and pharmaceuticals, genetic resources, and ornamental resources. Regulating services are benefits obtained from the regulation of ecosystem processes. The benefits include air quality maintenance, climate regulation, water regulation, erosion control, water purification and detoxification, natural hazard protection, and bioremediation of waste. Mangroves, shown in the picture on the right, provide shoreline protection from climate-related disasters such as storms, by reducing the risks of flooding and erosion. Culture services are benefits people obtain from ecosystems through spiritual enrichment, cognitive development, reflection, recreation, and aesthetic experiences. Some examples of cultural services include inspiration for art, folklore and architecture, enhancement of social relations, cultural heritage values, recreation and tourism. Supporting services are services that support all other ecosystem services. Impacts on humans may be indirect or occur over a long period of time. Benefits include soil formation and retention, nutrient cycling, primary production, water cycling, production of atmospheric oxygen, and provision of habitats. Take a few minutes to consider the following questions. Identify the ecosystem services available in a lake. Discuss which ecosystem services are important for the people living near the lake. If the quantity of water in the lake is severely reduced, how are people's livelihoods impacted? The objective of this section is to get acquainted with the different participatory approaches in identifying and valuing ecosystem services for development planning. In this section, the 4 different categories of ecosystem services will be used to identify and evaluate ecosystem services in a specific geographic area. This will help us better understand the complexities of the dependencies, trade-offs, and impacts between humans and ecosystems. By identifying and evaluating ecological, economic, and social issues, decision-making will also be enhanced. This approach is very data-intensive, however, it reduces the risks of compromising ecosystems while increasing options that retain ecosystem resilience. The World Resources Institute document, Ecosystem Services, a guide for decision makers provides recommendations for ecosystem services identification. The first recommendation is to keep assessment affordable. In case of limited funding, a scaled analysis of the selected ecosystem and data can still be valuable. Assessment boundaries should be determined based on the needs of the decision makers. One common boundary is the regional or watershed scale, as many ecosystem services are bound through hydrological processes. Data collection method should be done according to the decided scope. The final recommendation advises to consider uncertainties. An uncertainty analysis can identify which factors can impact the findings of the ecosystem services assessment. Stakeholders can be engaged in all these processes. For example, they can help access and assess data, and bring diverse perspectives. Valuation is the next step in the process. Ecosystem services can be valued using different methods found in the highlighted link, which can provide a systematic approach to capture the full range of environmental impacts by linking ecological effects to changes in human welfare, illustrate the benefits of the natural environment on the well-being and high dependency of society to its ecological base, and determine whether a policy intervention that alters an ecosystem condition delivers net benefits to society. Once ecosystem services are identified and valued in a specific geographic location, the information can be used for improved decision-making and development planning. Please consider the following question: would it be more cost-effective to invest in new infrastructure or to invest in ecosystem preservation and maintenance in a particular region? Let's explore the case of supplying New York City with clean drinking water. Watershed ecosystem services versus filtration plant. Sources west of the Hudson River at the Catskill Mountains and the headwater of the Delaware River supply clean drinking water to about 9 million people in New York City. These sources provide on average more than 4.9 million cubic meter of drinking water daily to the city. The water is filtered through more than 4,100 square kilometers of watershed area. Two solutions were proposed to stop water quality decline. Cost effectiveness was taken into consideration. The first solution included building a filtration plant, and the second entailed watershed protection to safeguard the ecosystem's capacity to provide water filtration services. The estimated cost of the Catskill, Delaware filtration facilities included a $6 billion upfront cost with a $300 million annual operating expense. The second solution raised multiple issues. Protecting the watershed meant controlling land use over a large territory. New York City owned about 6% of the Catskill, Delaware watershed. The New York State Catskill Forest Preserve held 20% of the land, and the rest of the watershed was privately owned. The privately owned areas were also a potential source of contaminants from agriculture and other land use activities. City officials proposed to protect all developable land in the watershed through direct acquisition or conservation easements. Conservation easements are voluntary agreements with landowners to limit the development of the land while retaining private ownership. The plan required $2.7 billion to purchase titles or acquire easements on about 240,000 acres, or about 971 square kilometers. The city decided on the second scenario. It negotiated a combination of land acquisition and management agreements with landholders to protect the watershed, resulting in a cost far less than the estimated cost of building a filtration facility. Furthermore, an ultraviolet water treatment facility was built. While the investment in the watershed proved cost-effective at the time, a filtration plant may still be needed in the future to meet increasing water demand. How do we make the ecosystem services approach more systematic for development planners? The IES or Integrated Ecosystem Services approach can be used for development planning. A guide called 6 Steps was developed to assist planners by providing a training tool, a tool to support dialogue, networks or learning, and a pilot to guide the IES approach in the planning of local projects. The 6 Steps Guide integrates ecosystem services in development planning for a local project by: first, defining the scope of assessment and setting the stage. This stage entails establishing objectives and designing processes. A few questions to consider at this stage include: who are the relevant stakeholders and how can they participate in the process? What are the issues to be addressed? What are the expected outcomes? Second, screening and prioritizing ecosystem services most relevant for the development plan is another step. Questions to consider here are: what are the most relevant ecosystem services in the area? How will the project impact or rely on the existing ecosystem services? Which stakeholders will be impacted and how? Third, identifying ecosystem service conditions, trends and trade-offs. In this step, the current status of ecosystem services identified in the previous step is analyzed. The analysis includes identification of changes, positive or negative, in the supply or demand of the ecosystem services. Fourth, appraising the institutional and cultural framework is another step. A better understanding of existing policies or regulations that directly or indirectly impact the ecosystem services is gained. The main stakeholders or institutions influencing the ecosystem services management are identified. Fifth, preparing better decision-making based on the information generated from the previous steps to identify entry points to key decision-making. Conducting an economic valuation of ecosystem services in the area can be a useful tool at this stage. The sixth and final stage is defining the implementation strategy and developing a concrete working plan, including policies, instruments, monitoring and communication. The Values Project website has several comprehensive resources to assist the integrating of ecosystem services approach into policy, planning and practice. Please explore the links to training courses, case studies and ecosystem services assessment methods. Explore the case studies in the Values Project website. Select a project that can be replicated in your area. What type of information or data is needed to implement this project? Describe methods for information and/or data collection. Information and data on ecosystem services can be collected through participatory approaches and the involvement of multiple stakeholders. The inclusion of multiple stakeholders will better provide insight and assist in identification, prioritization and evaluation of ecosystem services. Participatory approaches are helpful in identifying and valuing ecosystem services as these processes involve subjective judgments. Participatory approaches can also mitigate the risk of ignoring socio-cultural contexts, missing important services, or the increased risks of biased results when using data, models or literature reviews. There are several types of participatory approaches suitable for ecosystem services. Some examples include citizen science, participatory mapping or sensing, hackathons, workshops, and serious gaming. For more information about participatory approaches, visit Module 1 Overview of Participatory Approaches. In this section, we explore the role of participatory approaches in ecosystem services through use cases. Case Study 1: Mapping and Assessing Ecosystem Services in Ecuador. Ecuador has unique ecosystems rich with biodiversity that provide crucial ecosystem services for local communities. In-depth knowledge and information about ecosystem services and relevant risk of loss is vital for biodiversity conservation. The ECUMAES project in Ecuador mapped and evaluated ecosystem services. The project employed existing literature, reports of intergovernmental platforms for biodiversity and ecosystems, remote sensing data, and local and expert knowledge. The goal of the project was to conduct a joint mapping and evaluation of ecosystem services to aid in-depth research activities on biodiversity and ecosystem services in Ecuador. The project carried out several workshops and training sessions to fill gaps and uncertainties. Diverse stakeholder groups, such as scientists, experts and locals, were involved in the workshops and training sessions. Findings enabled the mapping of ecosystem services by using GIS-CAME software. GIS-CAME consists of Geographical Information Systems or GIS and multi-dimensional automatic analytical tools. Based on the findings of the project, the first national overview of ecosystem services was produced. It included valuable input for research and policy making on national and international levels. Case Study 2: Participatory Mapping of Cultural Ecosystem Services. Parco Nord of Milan, Italy. Urban green spaces provide important ecosystem services, crucial for the well-being and health of people. Land use planning and management decisions are often based on inadequate information. Most studies aim to map cultural ecosystem services are not used in land use planning decision-making. It is important to identify the needs and values of people, their priorities, and integrate them in decision-making. Parco Nord Park, established in 1975, located in the north of Milan, was chosen for the study. It is a densely populated area of 640 hectares. The goals of the study was to use the Public Participation GIS, or PPGIS, method to identify cultural ecosystem services valued by the visitors of the park, map the cultural ecosystem services valued by the managers and staff of the park, compare the perceptions of the two parties on cultural ecosystem services and identify their alignments and misalignments. The public participatory GIS method enables stakeholders to map and assess ecosystem services. Meetings were organized during which participants exchanged information and indicated features of value on a map. 31 visitors participated in 6 meetings. During the meetings, the concept of ecosystem services and its benefits were introduced, assessment approaches of the study were presented, questionnaires were completed, and data was collected and mapped on a hard copy park map. Meeting outcomes revealed that visitors prioritized benefits such as educational and ecological knowledge, mental and physical fitness, aesthetic, heritage, and cultural values. Each cultural ecosystem was prioritized differently by residents in different parts of the park. Perceptions of park managers and staff on cultural ecosystem services were also assessed. Park managers gave more value to aesthetic and cultural heritage, and mental and physical health benefits. The map on the left shows the values of ecosystem services allocated by park visitors, and the map on the right presents the perceptions of managers. There are misalignments between the perceptions of visitors and those of managers and staff on the benefits of ecosystem services provided by the park. Taking into consideration all perspectives during park planning and management will lead to enhanced decision-making. Case Study 3, using citizen science to monitor pollination services. Pollination is a vital ecosystem service provided by a wide range of insects, such as bees, wasps, beetles, and butterflies. The global value of pollination services range from $112 to $200 billion annually. More than 80% of the crops in Europe depend on pollination. A standard methodology for assessing and long-term monitoring of this ecosystem service, however, is lacking. The goal of the study was to collect data and to test whether monitoring of pollination services in green spaces was possible using citizen science. The Bees and Beans project was launched, calling for people on social media and mass media to participate. Every registered participant was given materials, including 12 Vica faba seeds, an insect repellent net, PVC containers, a guide, and registration sheets. Participants germinated and grew the seeds in containers. A number of plants of the same size were selected for further experimentation. Pollination on one plant was fully restricted by the insect repellent net, another plant was cross-pollinated by hand every 2 days, and the last plant was left for pollination by local insects. The plants were monitored by participants, the plant's state and weight was recorded. 88 out of 551 registered participants successfully completed the experiment. The study revealed that pollination services were not negatively impacted or limited in the UK. The wasp, Bombus hortorum, was also indicated as the main pollinator. The study successfully demonstrated the citizen science approach's effectiveness in measuring pollinating services and for large-scale monitoring schemes. Case Study 4, Payments for Ecosystem Services Program, an experimental game in rural Lao PDR. A game-based tool was used to evaluate the immediate and long-term behavioral change potential of 3 different payments for ecosystem services, also known as PES. The payment methods were direct payments for individual performance, direct payments for group performance, and insurance. The goal of the study was to assess the potential PES mechanisms for their immediate and longer-term impacts using a forest-framed experimental game in 4 Swidden practicing communities in northern Laos. 96 participants were divided into 8 groups. During the game, participants individually and simultaneously decided how many patches, up to 10 per round, to cultivate in a stylized forest with space for 100 agricultural plots. The game had 3 stages of 8 rounds each: pre-incentive, incentive, and post-incentive. The study revealed that group payments outperformed individual payments, and insurance incentives were ineffective. The game helped policymakers target environmental incentive programs to local contexts and taught program participants how incentive schemes work. This is a group simulation activity. There is a forest near your community. A plan is in motion to replace a large part of the forest with a farm. Divide into teams, stakeholders, including business, local governance, tourism industry, etc. Have each team explain their preferred participatory approach method. Identify the ecosystem services that are most relevant for each team. Compare and discuss the differences in perspectives. This module is developed in the frames of the German-Armenian network on the advancement of public participation GIS for ecosystem services as a means for biodiversity conservation and sustainable development, also known as the GATES project. Financed through DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, with funds from the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development.